Majority Whip.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
I come to the floor today to talk about the Republican plan for American prosperity in terms of why it is so popular. That's because Republicans want to cut taxes. Democrats, they want to raise taxes. Republicans want to grow the economy. The Democrats, they want to grow the government. Republicans want to put working families first. Democrats continue to want to leave them behind. Our Republican bill stops the largest tax increase in American history, and it means permanent tax relief. That means Americans can plan their future with certainty. It means higher wages, more jobs. That means Americans have more money in their pockets, in their purses, and in their paychecks. Mr. President, the Council on Economic Advisors released new data this week. Here's what it shows. Our plan for American prosperity raises wages, lowers taxes, and grows the economy. So let me just take a second to break down the benefits. $10,000 more in take-home pay for American families, an extra tax cut for tipped and overtime workers, $6,000 bonus deductions for seniors on Social Security, 7 million more jobs right here in America, $100 billion in business investments in opportunity zones, including rural America, an additional 4% economic growth, more than $2 trillion in deficit reduction, so that the next generation isn't buried in debt. Our plan for American prosperity will also create new savings accounts for every child. These tax-deferred investment accounts start with a $1,000 contribution. Now, those early savings will grow over time. By the time the child becomes an adult, they can use the money to pay for college, to put down a down payment on a home, or to start a small business. We call these Trump accounts. Trump accounts are an investment in our future generation. They're financial launch pads for the American dream. Additionally, our plan for prosperity unleashes American energy. This will help working families who've paid for high energy costs under Joe Biden. Now let's talk about what happens if Democrats are successful in defeating our bold Republican agenda. If Democrats block this bill, and they say they're going to, well, taxes will soar, paychecks will shrink, and small businesses will get strangled. Every Democrat in this chamber has vowed to vote against our economic prosperity package. The vote of every Democrat in this chamber will raise your taxes. Democrats get their way, middle-class families will pay $1,700 more in taxes next year. Small businesses will see their taxes go up by 43%. The standard deduction, which 90% of the taxpayers use, well, that's going to get cut in half. So will the child tax credit. Yet that's what the Democrats are fighting for: higher taxes, fewer jobs, and heavier costs on working families. Mr. President, let's not forget why Democrats want to raise taxes. They want to continue to give free health care to millions of illegal immigrants. Republicans are fighting so that waiters, nurses, and police officers and seniors and families keep more of what they earn and don't continue this Washington wasteful spending. Our comprehensive plan for prosperity is going to put America back on track. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsop-Brooks.
Other than that, I'm fine.
Mr. President,
Democratic Leader.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
So, Mr. President, I just left the classified all-senators briefing with the administration on Iran strikes. One thing is very, very clear. The briefing raised more questions than it answered. It's why we need to enforce the War Powers Act. I've always been clear, Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. And a few days ago, President Trump claimed that Iran's nuclear program was totally and completely obliterated. I asked what information exists to verify the president's claim, and I did not receive an answer to that question. What was clear from today's briefing is that there is no coherent strategy, no end game, no plan. What are we doing? Anybody who sat in that meeting and is honest with themselves would recognize that we need to enforce the War Powers Act and force the administration to provide answers to some very important questions about Iran and our national security. When the administration is forced to answer questions, we'll get more clarity, and maybe they'll get more clarity too. So it's an important thing to do. Let me talk about reproductive care and SCOTUS. 3 years ago after Dobbs, the MAGA Supreme Court has once again doubled down on its war on women. The court handed down a decision that immediately endangers funding for Planned Parenthood, one of the biggest organizations for affordable women's health care across the whole country. And it's not just about reproductive care. It endangers women's health care altogether. Clinics will close. Women will lose access to cancer screenings, contraceptives, physical exams for common illnesses, and so much more. For many women, Planned Parenthood is their only resource to get health care services at an affordable rate. Make no mistake, Senate Republicans own the consequences of this loathsome decision. They packed our court with extremists. They're the chief architects of the dismal state of women's health care in America. Senate Democrats will never, never relent in our efforts to ensure all women in America have high-quality health care. Access to health care is a basic right, no matter what the radicals on the MAGA court may think. Now, on reconciliation, everybody needs to understand exactly what's going on with the Republicans' so-called reconciliation bill. Their big, beautiful bill is buckling under its own weight. Republicans can't agree among themselves on just how devastating to make their own bill. Should it be a lot devastating, even more devastating? But don't be fooled. Republicans absolutely agree that one way or the other, they want Medicare cut to the bone. So now Republicans are scrambling behind closed doors, trying to rewrite the bill just enough to keep their Medicaid cuts alive. And why are they doing this? We know why. They want tax cuts for billionaires. But here's a thought. Instead of finding new ways to pass the same old cuts, why don't Republicans keep promises they've been making for weeks not to cut Medicaid? The dissonance we're hearing from Republicans is head-spinning. Because on the one hand, we've been hearing the same talking points for weeks, that somehow they're not going to cut people's Medicaid, that they're, quote, not in favor of cutting benefits regarding Medicaid. The quote, that quote, no one's losing their health care. That quote, should not there be any cuts? These are real statements. I just read from our Senate Republican colleagues in the last month, Senators Blackburn and Bozeman and Cassidy and Cornyn. And there's plenty more where that came from, but their words, unfortunately, don't match their actions. The Republican bill does exactly the opposite of what they're saying. It doesn't save Medicare and health care, it eviscerates it. Independent studies show the Republican bill would cut health care for 16 million Americans. It would decimate rural hospitals. It would harm nursing homes. It would kill nearly 1 million jobs. And it would raise health care costs for everyone, even those with private insurance. That's the bill the Republicans are working on right now, and that's what it would do. Apparently, Republicans are okay with the consequences. Former Leader McConnell shrugged off people's concerns, saying folks worried about Medicaid cuts will, quote, get over it. They'll have to get over it. Isn't that cruel? Meanwhile, Senator Ernst told people to stop fussing because, quote, we're all going to die. What planet are they on? Is this Republican talk to people back home worried about seeing a doctor Is this how Republicans talk to people back home worried about seeing a doctor, taking care of their kids, and affording prescription drugs? Now, a few Senate Republicans have shown some flickers of lucidity in closed-door meetings and in hallway conversations. A few at least claim they recognize what the rest of us already know. Their own bill would decimate their own constituents. The senior senator from North Carolina was handing out flyers at a recent Republican lunch detailing how his own state and 9 others would lose tens of billions in funding and see hundreds of thousands of people lose insurance. The senior senator from Missouri acknowledged it's just not the right thing to do to shut down a bunch of rural hospitals to pay for tax cuts. The senator from Wisconsin warned, "We are mortgaging our children's future. It's unconscionable, it's immoral, it has to stop." Well, these are all nice words, but they mean nothing if the only thing Republicans do over the next few days is find new ways to pass the same old cuts. New lipstick, same pig. That's what's going on right now with the Republican bill. So Republicans have a choice to make. They can keep chasing arbitrary deadlines. They can keep making edits and changes in the hopes that some combination of Medicaid and SNAP and clean energy cuts will make it to the floor. They can keep rewriting a bad bill into a slightly different bad bill. Or they can ask the obvious question: should we pass this bill at all? The answer is no. They should abandon Donald Trump's so-called beautiful bill. It makes no sense whatever for Republicans to pass a bill that even they admit will kick millions of hardworking Americans off health insurance. It makes no sense for Republicans to pass a bill that will kill good-paying energy jobs, most of them in Republican states, while surrendering American energy independence to China. It is morally bankrupt to take food away from kids to give to the ultra-rich, and morally bankrupt to saddle future generations with insurmountable debt. And it is morally bankrupt to ask working and middle Americans to bankroll tax breaks for billionaires at a time they're struggling to pay for groceries and rent. So the Senate Republican bill is not just flawed, it is irredeemable. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Chair recognizes Democratic Whip.
Are we in a quorum call?
We are.
Ask consent it be removed, suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, Senate Judiciary Committee Democrats have successfully challenged several controversial judiciary provisions from the Republican so-called One Big Beautiful Bill. One example, the Republicans included a provision that would have limited the ability of individuals to challenge the Trump administration's executive actions by potentially putting them on the hook for millions of dollars when they try to defend their constitutional rights and go to court. Fortunately, the Senate parliamentarians struck this provision. Now, I'm proud of what we accomplished in eliminating some harmful provisions, but there's still a lot of problems with the big, beautiful bill. The more we learn about this bill, the worse it looks. Perhaps that's why there's a hurry to get this done before the 4th of July and people can take a close look at the details. I cannot stand idly by as my Senate Republican colleagues try to steamroll this bill through Congress because the president wants to do something before the 4th of July. We all know the provisions relative to health care and what they mean. The version that came over from the House of Representatives would have stricken health insurance coverage for 16 million families in America. What a wonderful idea. What are the Republicans thinking? There must be some really emergency reason to take health insurance coverage away from 16 million families. Well, it turns out the reason is to give a tax break to the wealthiest people in America. Oh, you Democrats, you always say that. It just can't be true. Listen, it is true. If you take people making $400,000 a year, the tax breaks that are being given by the Republicans, 60% of them go to people making more than $400,000 a year. And at the highest levels of income, the Elon Musk part of the world, $346,000 a year in tax breaks. I've got to say, I met Mr. Musk. I don't know him very well, but I don't think he'll miss it if $346,000 in tax breaks don't come his way. But I do think 16 million families will miss health insurance coverage. I knew I would. In 2021, when I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the parliamentarian ruled against our efforts, Democratic efforts, to include immigration policy in a reconciliation bill, even though the budget impact was more than $100 billion. At the time, the parliamentarian wrote, and I quote, "The reasons that people risk their lives to come to this country cannot be measured in federal dollars." That's still true. Despite this precedent, Republicans' judiciary title of the Big Beautiful Bill is a wish list of policy changes to help carry out mass deportations of immigrants who've lived in our country for years and pose no threat to our safety. Let's get down to the bottom line here. If someone is living in this country seeking citizenship and they're dangerous, they commit a serious crime, as far as I'm concerned, they're gone. They forfeited any right to consider staying in this country or acquiring citizenship. But there's so many others who came to this country and overstayed a student visa, overstayed a tourist visa, and they are technically in violation of the law. What have they done with their lives? Look around America, they're everywhere. They're working in your hospitals, they're working in your hotels, they're working in your restaurants, they're living next door to you, and they're going to church with you and your kids. These are people who are making America a stronger nation. And to brand them as criminals or rapists or terrorists without any proof whatsoever is just plain wrong. It's a shame that we reached this point. Don't take my word for it. Listen to what White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller said, quote, "Wow, it's amazing what this bill, the Big Beautiful Bill, accomplishes. The full border agenda, the full immigration agenda. These policies of mass deportation of immigrants are cruel and mean, and they go beyond any question of public safety. This bill would impose exorbitant fees that would make it impossible for vulnerable immigrants to access humanitarian relief in the United States. This includes a $1,000 fee on asylum and a $5,000 bond for parents seeking to be reunited with their child. The fee also placed barriers on due process, a $900 fee for an appeal in an immigration court. These fees are not just unconscionable, they're unfair. The Republican reconciliation bill increases state and local law enforcement grants funding. That sounds good, doesn't it? Well, you're wrong. This provision specifically prohibits using grant funds for community violence intervention and prevention programs, which are proven, evidence-informed strategies to reduce violence. We have a gun violence epidemic in America. Currently, guns are the #1 cause of death for American children and teens. Let me repeat that. In America, guns are the #1 cause of death for American children and teens. Not auto accidents, not cancer, guns. We need to support and strengthen community violence intervention and prevention programs. I've seen them, and I've seen them work in the city of Chicago and all around my state of Illinois to stop violent incidents before they happen. And we need to connect people with treatment and tools that decrease the risk of future violence. But instead of supporting valuable public safety measures, the Republican Big Beautiful Bill removes taxes and regulations on certain rifles, shotguns, and gun silencers. That's just what we need in America, isn't it? Cheaper guns. Combating this epidemic takes ingenuity and funding, not the reversal of life-saving gun violence prevention policies. But Republicans' reckless reconciliation bill will jeopardize the progress that's been made in our communities. And to make matters worse, Senator Cruz of Texas has added a provision that would leave the USAI, advanced intelligence industry, an unregulated Wild West. This provision would give states the choice between regulating AI or accepting federal funding under the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program. This means states would have to choose between freezing all regulations on artificial intelligence for the next decade or give up specific federal funding. In addition to preventing new state regulation, it would make many of the laws already passed by states unenforceable regarding issues of AI, such as political deepfakes, fake face recognition, and algorithmic discrimination. We are currently living with the results of our failure to regulate big tech when it came to social media. Let's not make the same mistake when it comes to AI. This provision by Senator Cruz will allow big tech and bad actors to prey on the lack of regulations in the AI space and develop deceptive, biased, and potentially dangerous tools that hurt ordinary Americans and diminish trust in technology. Senator Cruz claims that provisions would only affect a state's eligibility to receive a part of the $500 million federal investment. But as my Democratic colleagues, Senator Cantwell and Markey, have pointed out, there's also a stipulation in the provision that would hold $42 billion in essential broadband program funding hostage. This would force states to choose between protecting consumers from AI-related harm or expanding critical broadband. Senator Cruz's provision provides greater harm to the American people than good. And listen, it says that this will be for until 10 years. I would like to say that I'm confident the federal government would respond within 10 years, but there's certainly no guarantee. I promise to support any amendment that will remove the AI pause provision from this bill, and I hope my Republican colleagues will do the same. So now is the real test for my Senate Republican colleagues. Will they stand with President Trump and provide tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires, or will they stand with their hardworking constituents and reject this betrayal? What's more important, a tax break for Elon Musk or the health insurance of $16 million America? What's more important, a tax break for the wealthiest people in America or your rural hospital? I think people know that when it comes to the quality of life, the hospital is more important and health insurance is critical. I hope for the sake of our country, 4 Republican senators will have the courage to step up and choose their constituents over special interest groups. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that at 5:45 p.m. the Senate execute the order of June 24th with respect to the Keyes nomination. And following disposition of the Keyes nomination, the Senate resume legislative session and being in a period of morning business, with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Chair recognizes the senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to use a prop during my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Uncle Sam is the nation's largest landlord, yet he will never win a round of Monopoly, the classic board game where players try to make money and avoid going bankrupt by buying, renting, and selling property. That's because Uncle Sam, who is already $37 trillion in debt, refuses to sell off unused and unneeded properties that are costing tens of millions of dollars a year to maintain. Many of Uncle Sam's properties are also fixer-uppers, requiring billions of dollars in much-needed renovations and overdue upgrades, some of which are listed on this board. Holding on to unaffordable properties that are nearly vacant while being just a roll or two away from going bankrupt is not only a losing strategy in Monopoly, but also a bad game plan in real life. But Uncle Sam gets away with it because Washington plays by its own set of rules. And no matter how you roll the dice, Washingtonopoly is a losing game for taxpayers. To demonstrate, why don't we go ahead and play around? Okay, that was my attempt to roll the dice. Okay, so 3, we rolled a 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we landed on the Department of Agriculture South Building in Washington, D.C. And guess what, folks? It's owned by good old Uncle Sam. Let's look at the stats for the USDA South Building. 78% of this building isn't even being used on a day-to-day basis. Yet we are paying more than $11 million for utilities every single year. And the building requires $1.7 billion for repairs and upgrades. We could hold on to this property and pay these costs for a nearly empty building, or we could sell it and make $261 million or more. What would you do? Well, Uncle Sam has decided to keep it and is passing along the costs to taxpayers. So let's roll again. Okay, 2, we got 2. Let's see, 1, 2, great. We landed on community chest, so let's pick a card. Community chest. Pay $81 million for unused property. That's right, folks. Every year, Uncle Sam pays out over $81 million maintaining underutilized offices. This includes nearly 7,700 vacant buildings and another 2,265 that are largely empty. No wonder the nonpartisan Public Buildings Reform Board says Washington's, quote, wasteful real estate practices would not endure for so long in a private sector company. But when playing Washingtonopoly, Uncle Sam doesn't pay the cost for his wasteful decisions. You do. How about we take one more turn? 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. This time we landed on chance, so we get to pick another card. So there we go, there's our chance card. Pass the For Sale Act and advance to go. Folks, that is exactly the type of chance we need to protect taxpayers. Selling off Uncle Sam's unneeded property has long been tied up by overly restrictive red tape and bureaucratic barriers. To revamp Washington's real estate rules, I introduced the For Sale Act. Passing this bill will put 6 pieces of prime property in the nation's capital on the auction block immediately. Selling just these spots will bring in at least $400 million while also canceling costs, including $2.9 billion in overdue maintenance. This is just the first step in downsizing Uncle Sam's unused, unneeded, and unaffordable real estate holdings. To any interested potential buyers, you can build a house or even a hotel on these properties and earn rent, just like Monopoly. But best of all, taxpayers finally get to advance to go and collect $400 million. That, folks, is how you win the game. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Chair recognizes the senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
I ask for a unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business for 5 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know that people from all over Washington State have been celebrating Pride this month, and many are going to be heading to Seattle this weekend. And a lot of those celebrations will actually be taking place at Cal Anderson Park in Capitol Hill. For those who don't know, Cal was a friend of mine. So I wanted to share a little about his story and how it relates to what is happening in our country today. Cal was a Vietnam veteran and Washington's first openly gay state legislator. During my time as a state senator, we worked together to help make state government more accessible to the public. But in 1995, like so many at that time, we lost Cal too soon as a result of his AIDS diagnosis. I remember visiting him in the hospital just a month before he passed. And of course, he wasn't focused on himself. He was telling me, newly elected to the U.S. Senate, what I needed to do to make health care better for other people in our country. That is still relevant today as we face down Republican attacks on Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. Cal's election back then was a huge step towards equality, and he really helped change people's opinions. I've served now in the Senate Appropriations Committee since I was first elected here, and I've always kept stories like Cal's close to me, fighting to invest in medical research and HIV prevention programs year after year. Over the years, we have made enormous and tremendous strides in the fight to prevent and even cure HIV and AIDS so that others do not suffer that fate that Cal did. NIH funding is supporting work to discover an HIV vaccine, and separately, PEPFAR, which helps prevent HIV infections around the world, has been one of the most effective programs in our country's history. But Donald Trump has now terminated more than $250 million in NIH funding supporting work to discover an HIV vaccine. Much of that work happened at Fred Hutchins, Seattle, for over 20 years. And now he is pushing Congress to pass hundreds of millions in cuts to PEPFAR. And it's not just that. Trump is terminating all kinds of NIH studies if they even have the words gay or trans in them. He's overseeing an all-of-government campaign to turn back the clock and go after our trans friends and loved ones. It is totally wrong, and it's backwards. Pride this year represents tremendous progress, but that progress is being threatened today like never before. So to everyone who is heading to Cal Anderson Park this weekend, I hope you will join me in reflecting on Cal's story, remembering how his fight matters today, and using your voice to speak up against this discrimination and this administration. We can't let them sweep these attacks on science and the LGBTQ community under the rug. Let's keep fighting together to end HIV and AIDS, to protect health care for everyone, and for equal rights under the law, no matter who you are or who you love. Because in the end, we will win. Mr. President, I also ask unanimous consent that Randy Elway and Ian Newsom from my staff be granted floor privileges for the remainder of this Congress.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of a quorum. Oh, I take that back. Withhold.
Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week, our nation lost a revolutionary business leader, a committed philanthropist, an incredible Tennessean. His name, Fred Smith. Like all great leaders, Fred had a vision for a better future, and he did everything possible to make it happen. That's why in 1973, he founded FedEx with a simple yet bold idea: improve overnight delivery. Today, we take instant shipping for granted in many ways. It's the engine of our global economy, but back then, it was not considered to be a practical or workable idea. So it, too, took Fred to make it happen. He pioneered innovations in transportation and logistics, and those pioneering innovations have defined the industry ever since. He truly led the way, and it was not easy. But with his commitment to excellence, he grew FedEx into a $53 billion company that employs 500,000 people, connects more than 220 countries and territories, and moves more than 17 million shipments each and every day. Even with his global accomplishments, Fred never lost sight of home. He based his company in his hometown of Memphis, turning the city into a center for global logistics. And through his philanthropic support for education, community programs, arts, healthcare, and more, he always found ways to give back to his community and to make Memphis a better place. In many ways, service truly defined his life. Before founding FedEx, Fred served for 4 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, including 2 tours in Vietnam. He was decorated with the Silver Star, Bronze Star, and 2 Purple Hearts. But for Fred, the greatest honor was serving alongside his troops as a company commander. In an interview last year, Fred recounted a time when the men in his company dug his foxhole for him so that he could get more rest. They were as tired or more tired, but they took their energy to take care of me. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to me because it told me they cared for me, they appreciated my leadership. We should all be grateful for Fred Smith and that he chose a life of leadership and service. On behalf of all Tennesseans, I extend my heartfelt condolences to Fred's beloved wife, Diane, his 9 children, and his entire family. Mr. President, as if in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 308, which is at the desk.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 308, honoring the life, achievements, and legacy of Frederick W. Smith.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. President. This week has given the pro-life movement quite a bit to celebrate. On Tuesday, we marked the 3rd anniversary of the landmark decision in Dobbs versus Jackson. And today, the United States Supreme Court delivered another life-affirming victory in the Medina versus Planned Parenthood case out of South Carolina, holding that states can defund the abortion industry by ensuring that abortion providers are excluded from the state's Medicaid program. This common sense decision from the Supreme Court reinforces the important work that pro-life lawmakers are doing at the state and federal level to keep tax dollars out of the abortion business. We can rest easy knowing that pro-life states across America are fiercely protecting the lives of innocent preborn children. But a child's right to exist should not depend on geography. And that is why my fellow pro-life colleagues joined me on the Senate floor today to commemorate this time when the responsibility of protecting human life has been returned to the people and their elected leaders at both the state and federal level. 3 years ago, the Supreme Court held that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe and Casey are overruled, and the authority to regulate abortion is returned to the people and their elected representatives. I'm especially proud that my home state of Mississippi was at the center of this historic decision. The Dobbs landmark decision and all those involved in making it happen are very close to my heart, including my friends, Representative Becky Curry of Brookhaven, Mississippi, who authored the bill, and Attorney General Lynn Fitch, who represented our state so well in the Supreme Court. The High Court gave us exactly what we asked for. 227 of my pro-life colleagues in Congress joined me on the brief we filed in Dobbs asserting that it is long overdue for this court to return lawmaking to legislatures. We respectfully urge the court to affirm the constitutional authority of the federal and state governments to safeguard the lives and health of their citizens, born and not yet born. While the pro-life movement has long sought to change hearts and minds through decades of court battles, today we can make a real difference to ensure our laws reflect the values we hold dear. A handful of examples of these legislative efforts include supporting pregnancy resource centers, protecting abortion survivors, and ensuring U.S. tax dollars are not funneled into the abortion industry. While the pro-life community has held an outstretched hand to expecting parents who may be facing tough and scary hurdles, a primary one being the financial cost of birth, my colleagues and I are committed to supporting these families. To that end, the Supporting Healthy Moms and Babies Act is meant to ease the out-of-pocket costs paid by parents to have a child. If we can relieve the financial stresses associated with pregnancy and childbirth, I hope expecting mothers and fathers will feel empowered to embrace the beautiful gift of parenthood. As a proud Christian, mother, and committed member of the pro-life movement, I will continuously fight to uphold and defend the dignity of every life at every stage. Dobbs lifted the gate for us to move forward, and there is still much important work to be done. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
To recognize the senator from Montana.
Mr. President, I want to thank my colleague, Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith of Mississippi, who also chairs the pro-life caucus in the U.S. Senate. I want to thank her for organizing this event today because we just passed the 3-year anniversary of the overturn of Roe versus Wade. That was on June 24th, 2022. That decision was a pivotal moment in our nation's history. Roe v. Wade was the worst Supreme Court decision, I would argue, since Plessy versus Ferguson, and resulted in the tragic deaths of millions of innocent lives. Countless numbers of precious unborn lives have been saved. In fact, since Roe's overturn, just in these 3 years, 13 states have implemented laws to protect life starting at conception. 19 states total have enacted pro-life laws. And earlier today, the Supreme Court delivered yet another pro-life victory in the Medina versus Planned Parenthood decision. The court affirmed that states have the right to decide how Medicaid dollars are spent, and that no one can force a state to fund the abortion industry. For too long, abortion providers like Planned Parenthood have used federal health care dollars as a backdoor to sustain their operations. And this ruling puts an end to that abuse and upholds the fact that taxpayers should never be compelled to subsidize big abortion. Cindy and I are the parents of 4. We're now the grandparents of 7. And I've always believed that protecting the unborn is one of our most important duties. It's a belief that I carry with me each day to this job in the U.S. Senate. In fact, that's why back in 2018, I founded the Pro-Life Caucus for the U.S. Senate. I had no idea at that point, this was pre-Dobbs, how important our work would become. And I'm grateful to the state of Mississippi, to Senator Hyde-Smith's home state, where the Dobbs decision came from. It was the courage of those folks in Mississippi that resulted in that case getting before the Supreme Court that had a profound impact across our nations with this Supreme Court ruling just a little over 3 years ago. During my time as chairman of the Pro-Life Caucus, we confirmed pro-life justices of the Supreme Court, including Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who went on to serve as that critical 5th vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. I remember that day very well when that news came down. I was struck by a truth that's found in the Old Testament. It's in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 1, verse 5. This is a great mystery, a mystery of God, where it says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were even born, I set you apart." What a great truth, how God knows us, He loves us, and a reminder that all life, all lives are made in the image of God. And that's why there's dignity and there's value in every single life. And that includes the unborn, includes the disabled, the aging. All lives are worthy. I'm glad to see our country has made great strides in defending the defenseless. When we had our 4 children, I remember going through those appointments, those doctor appointments with Cindy and seeing those amazing images, seeing ultrasounds, but that was 20, 25, even 30 plus years ago. Today we get to relive that again with our grandchildren, and now our children when they're having their babies. And the technology is so remarkable. It's amazing to get an insight in what's going on in the womb. And, for those who don't believe in creation, don't believe that we were created, sometimes you just got to go back and see the miracle of life that's occurring as that little baby's being formed in the mom's womb. But today, the chemical abortion pill is the most widespread form of abortion. In fact, in 2023, it accounted for 63% of all abortions, and that number continues to rise. President Joe Biden and his administration removed safety precautions on taking mifepristone, including the in-person dispensing requirement and follow-up visit with a medical provider. And thanks to the Biden administration, the pills can even be shipped out by mail despite concrete evidence showing they're extremely harmful to women. In fact, the FDA and the pro-abortion advocates market the pill as, quote, safe as Tylenol. But here are the facts. There was just a recently published analysis of health insurance claims of over 865,000 women across the United States. They found that 1 in 10 women experience serious adverse effects, many of these resulting in emergency room visits. Now, let me share a stat here that's going to be shocking, and the data here is irrefutable, and we invite anybody to come check this data out. Here was the conclusion. The adverse health effects for women in this most recent study was 22 times higher than what's on the FDA's label on the abortion pills. Clearly, in no way is that abortion pill safe, and the FDA should reevaluate appropriate protections surrounding its use. I'm confident that with President Trump's leadership, with our Republican majority in the U.S. Senate, we're going to make some progress here. Already, President Trump has supported the pro-life movement. One of his first actions after taking office was to pardon 23 peaceful pro-life protesters who were unjustly incarcerated by Joe Biden's Justice Department. And in the U.S. Senate, I was proud to join my colleagues this Congress to introduce the Unborn Child Support Act, which will allow pregnant women to receive child support payments. Caring for a child starts long before birth. Any pregnant mom, any mom who understands what that process is like knows that caring for a child starts long before birth. And by supporting expectant mothers, we recognize the humanity of the unborn child and make sure that women have access to the resources they need to choose life. I'll fight to get this bill across the finish line. You know, it takes courage to stand for life in this day and age. I'd like to take a moment to thank all who have played a role in advancing the movement, from many of my fellow senators here to advocacy groups, to the grassroots advocates back in our home states, and to those who offer us prayers at night. Everybody plays a part. And I'm confident that one day, by the grace of God and the actions of this body, abortion will be unthinkable, where every preborn child will be protected by law. You know, I spend a lot of time with students who come from our states. We all know that. We see the kids when they come, they tour us. We'll have junior high kids, sometimes grade school, high school students, come from small towns, medium towns, large towns from our states. So we have these Montanans that come into our office. And I always like holding a meeting. I bring them into my office, and we sit down. Sometimes not enough chairs. Some students will be standing up. And I love just taking questions from the students. And invariably, there'll be a student that will raise their hand and ask me a question about my stance as it relates to a woman's right to choose or abortion. And rather than be a dad in that moment, and I've been a dad in a lot of moments raising our 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, I think sometimes it's best for us to collectively kind of give some thought to how do you answer that question. So what I ask them is, how many of you have a smartphone? And most every one of those students has a phone. So let's just do a thought experiment here. Go to Google and type in 15-week baby, 15-week baby. And then touch on the images link on top. And let's talk about what we see there. And of course, the students, there's not a lot more said at that point. It's silent. I've done this many, many, many times because I just ask a basic question. Let's just have a debate. Is that life or not? If we were NASA scientists and the Mars rover lands on Mars and that image was projected back to a group of PhD scientists and literally rocket scientists, would they conclude that's life or not? And I've done this many, many, many times, and I will tell you, it's just silence as we all reflect on that basic question. Now, why did I pick a 15-week baby in the womb? It's because that was the line of demarcation that Mississippi had in their Dobbs case that defined, Mississippi said that's where life begins. That's where the protections begin. And it was that basis, that case went before the United States Supreme Court. It was what a 15-week baby looks like, and I think all of us should reflect on that. No matter where we are politically, where we are In terms of advocacy, just to take a look at those images and reflect and ask yourself, is that a baby or not? And I think the images and the technology today with the clarity of ultrasounds is a pretty convincing argument. So this week, as we celebrate this historic anniversary of the Dobbs decision, let's reflect with grateful hearts on the progress we've made. Let's look forward with hope to a future where every life, whether born or unborn, is valued.
President.
As Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I ask you unanimous consent that the scheduled roll call be called immediately.
Without objection. The question occurs on the nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted.
Aye.
Mrs. Hyde Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slutkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Barrasso, Capito, Cotton, Crapo, Grassley, Hawley, Husted, Hyde-Smith, Johnson, Marshall, Moreno, Ricketts, Rounds, Sheehy, Tillis, Tuberville. Senators voting in the negative: Kane, Kim, Lujan, Murray, Padilla, Peters, Rosen, Van Hollen. Mr. Coons, no. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Curtis, aye. Mr. Fetterman, no. What's that? Mr. Banks, aye.